Welcome to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba. Thanks for joining with us. I have Mark Pesce, the Next Billion Seconds podcast on the show with me today, broadcasting from Sydney, Australia. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
All right, now you're a futurist, inventor, writer, entrepreneur, and educator, and podcaster. What is the Next Billion Seconds in general and cryptonomic in particular?
So the Next Billion Seconds is a show that's really taking a look at the next 30 years. A billion seconds is 30 years. It's about a generation. It's a good unit of time for us to think about what we want forward, how we want to live, how we want our kids to live, how we want the world to be. And so I interview people who are very much in the middle of making that world happen. Now, one of the biggest changes that's happening in finance, and we're seeing now blockchain and cryptocurrencies, which are a use of the blockchain, becoming more and more prominent. But earlier this year, we saw people making a lot of very poor investment decisions around cryptocurrencies. And what I wanted to do was do my best to provide people with a basic understanding of the technology and what it would mean both today and in the future so that they could make better investment decisions about these offers when they come.
Give me some particulars on that, because that's a broad statement, but you've got some things that you've covered.
Yeah. So we actually took it step by step. So we really did take a look at first, how do they work? How is it that you can have a form of digital money that you can't just copy and paste forever and ever and ever like you can with everything else that's digital? So how do you have this digital scarcity? And that happens with something called a blockchain, which is a kind of ledger that can be inspected by everyone so that you can tell that you have your money and I have my money, and I can tell that I have my money and you have your money, and we can tell that we don't have each other's money. And we can do this in a way that makes us both mathematically certain that this is the case. And that's the first real advance in accounting since dual entry accounting 700 years ago. And it opens up a whole new way of people being able to work financially together, whether they're accounting for money or they're accounting for trade goods or whatever it might be. Once we established that, we were able to then move forward and okay, here's how people are using it, not just for a currency like Bitcoin, but if they're going to do agricultural settlements, some people are using it so that if there's a local solar generation, neighborhoods can trade that amongst themselves as well. And there are all these different ways of being able to use that technology. Once we established that, we started to move into what we call smart contracts. Smart contracts are what money's going to look like over the next billion seconds. So when you have money in your digital wallet, it will have some code attached to it that will allow the money to act on its own in your behalf without your attention. You'll have given it some rules. You'll have given it some guidance. You might even have given it some artificial intelligence so that it's always making the most of itself for you before you use it. But that means money is going to have a mind of its own, and that's going to be a very weird world.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, it reminds me of a wife. But let's move forward. What's the impetus on doing this special series?
So it was really around giving people as much information as they could about this world so that people are getting a lot of offers. There's been a lot of, I think, both just excitement and irrational exuberance about what's possible with cryptocurrencies. We saw the price of Bitcoin go to $20,000 or thereabouts earlier this year. It's down to about $4,000 now. And people wonder if it has any natural value, for example. And my feeling is that just in terms of a global marketing campaign, Bitcoin is worth a lot of money because a lot of people know what it is. And if it were a brand would have spent a lot of money for that kind of recognition. So there's some space for understanding what the value of these cryptocurrencies are, how they can be used, how you can know whether a use is a good use or not. But there's always, it comes down to, and we actually start the series with the Buffett rule. If you don't understand it, don't invest in it. And I think that we just need to keep on coming back to that.
I agree with you. The next billion seconds, what do you see happening? You're a futurist, so take us down that road.
So there's a lot that's going to be going on with respect to how we share, how we learn, how we make things, how we collaborate. The overall trend is that we have such good tools to help us be smart. We don't always use them. We're getting better at using them, but when we can use them, both individually and in groups, we can almost always be smarter than we used to be. And so part of what we need to do is take that into our work practice, our business practice, and just our normal activities around how can we leverage all of the connectivity that we have, that there are 4 billion people walking around with smartphones in the world, who you have access to enormous knowledge and enormous experience. How can we make the most of that in every moment? And that's a part of the big story. And the story that I think maybe we didn't understand a few years ago is that not only are people going to use that for good, but people are also going to use that to get their way in the world, whether or not that's good for people.
That's true. And in your podcast, are you separating those two, talking about what happens when people are using it for good versus using it for nefarious reasons?
So in series 2, we really did this sort of very long study of the changing nature of truth, which became a real feature during the presidential campaigns, during Brexit, and is just a feature of the way we're dealing with social media and the news media these days, that we have different ways of understanding them, different ways of coming to the truth. We can have competing versions of the truth now, whatever that means. And so we talk to people who are very much at the coalface on this, both understanding and building systems that represent perhaps new kinds of journalism, new kinds of helping to understand how communities form around the things they want to believe in and how they share those beliefs. And so what we're seeing is, I guess, what culture is going to start to look like in the 21st century, how when people are growing up in the world, and a 15-year-old has a very different sense of how they learn about the world than I do at 56, because they're getting their information from Facebook, they're getting it from Instagram, they might be getting it from Twitter, although that's mostly for older folks. And so their relationship to how they learn about what's important to them and what's important in the world is different, and we need to take a look at that. We need to understand how that works.
I agree. Are you drilling down into those topics on your show?
We absolutely are. We got Jay Rosen, who's probably the leading expert on understanding what's happening to journalism. Dana Boyd is the leading expert to understanding how communities of teenagers share and learn amongst themselves, but also what's happening around communities that we might call extremist, how they gather data, how they can change search results so that when, for instance, a shooting comes up in the news, they can be the top search results so they can get their message across about why that shooting happened. There's all of these new things that are happening now because we live in a highly algorithmic, highly computerized culture, and people have learned how to get in there and tweak those algorithms to serve their needs.
You know, I'd like to know more about that. As a matter of fact, I know that it's early. Thank you for getting up so early to be on our show, but I'd like to continue the conversation as we go forward so that we can talk about some of these things that you bring up, because you're definitely on the cutting edge, if not the bleeding edge, of what's going on in the world when it comes to the new disruptive topics that need to be talked about. I mean, you and I'm just going to tell you right now, I've always been 5 to 7 years ahead of broadcast network, and going back 17 years now. And you are right out there in front. I would love to hear more about the people you talk to and the topics that you talk about, because I can tell right now you have brought it out to the front, and you're going to take the stuff that nobody would ever hear about unless it was you bringing it out onto our show. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much. And again, everyone can listen to all the shows they want. Podcast 1, the show's name is The Next Billion Seconds.
Great title. Mark, thanks for being a guest on today's show.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is Michael Yorba. You've been watching CEO Money.